On paper, Americans should be happier than they ever have been before. Today, you can access unlimited amounts of information at any point in time. You can now contact and communicate with people all across the world. You have a constant stream of information where you can keep up to date with everything going on at all times. You can have every single product or piece of food that you would desire delivered to you in an instant. But this is not what we see. Over the last century, really, we see Americans becoming less and less happy. We see depression going up and anxiety going up, suicide going up. And why is this? Why, despite everything should be better, but it doesn't matter. Everybody is still worse off. We've seen what? The sexual liberation, the overall feminist movement, the civil rights movement. With all of those things in mind, you really would think Americans would be very, very content and happy at this point. We have reached equality, you could say. Everybody is looked at the same. Yet what we see is this has only caused more divide. Equality has broken apart America. Families have been destroyed all across the nation. Loneliness is at an all-time high. The United States Surgeon General has called this loneliness an epidemic at this point. The average man is feeling atomized from the rest of society. You wonder why all these self-help and self-improvement YouTubers have been blowing up recently? It's because we have a generation of young men who have no friends. They have no real social interaction on a daily basis. They are kept inside all day and their entire world is spent on technology. All of these improvements that should have made the world a much happier and better place have only destroyed not just our country, but every single first world country in the world. Any country that has adopted these new world technologies has had to pay the price. We have seen drastic effects across the globe. It's undoubted at this point. The effects are right in everybody's faces, but everybody prefers to look away because they can't live without the instant stimulation provided by all these new endeavors. Right? I mean, look, you have a computer that you can just stare at all day long, and it's just instant gratification, instant gratification. You have all these movies, video games, unlimited access to anything you could imagine. Again, you can order anything you want and it'll instantly arrive. You don't even have to go out to buy food anymore. It can be delivered right to you. And you'd think, yeah, I'm gonna be so happy when I have all these things when my entire life is automated. But the truth is, all this automation is only destroying us. Now, instead of being able to get this social interaction from going to some kind of store that is completely stripped away from you, if you go to a grocery store, I mean, there's less and less young people there now. It's almost only old people that still shop. That's at least what I see. I've gone. I don't even go very often. I mean, not surprising. I'm 15, but still. You don't see a lot of young people. It's mostly older people because young people now do all this like pickup stuff where they just have it delivered directly to them because it's all about convenience. Another thing I've noticed is you go to a cash register. Before like COVID, there was a lot less loneliness before then, right? But our government decided to shut everything down and split everybody apart. So we came back and a lot of these newer and younger people from these newer generations have no idea how to socially interact with one another because their entire social life is through technology at this point. Everything was stripped from them in the real world, so they turn to devices like Snapchat. So you go to like a cash register and you try to make small talk, which used to be not all that difficult. Pretty much everybody could do it. Everybody could hold a 5-minute conversation, but that's not true anymore. You quickly see that the other person gets uncomfortable almost. You can ask how their day was going and you get like a quiet response. They don't smile as much as they used to. They seem annoyed that you're trying to interact with them. That's what you see today. People don't want to socially interact because it's too difficult. It forces them out of this comfort that has been gifted to them so easily. Another thing with all this happiness, right? As I said before, we've seen the civil rights movement, we've seen feminism. You'd think that these groups would all be happier now, right? The black population, the female population. But that's not true. Pretty much every single group's happiness has gone down drastically. And this is especially true for women. You can look at this study, the paradox of declining female happiness. It looks at the happiness standards from 1970 to, I believe it was like early 2000s, I want to say. I don't remember 100%, but I believe that's what it was. What we see is that women were significantly happier than men in 1970. Men were like kind of like meh. Men have always been just kind of meh with everything, right? They were like, you know what, life's all right. We've seen men's happiness has stayed pretty stagnant with a minor decline, which I would argue isn't entirely true because you can look at the suicide rates and such, and we see a significant increase. So more than likely, men have just kind of lied all throughout history and said they were happier than they actually were, or back then possibly said they were sadder than they actually were because men are just kind of like okay with everything, right? It's generally what you get when you ask men about their feelings. But you look at women who are typically much more open, and you see that their happiness in 1970 very high. They all rated it very high, especially in comparison to men. But since then, we have seen a significant decline, a massive drop off, to the point where women are now less happy than what men report to being. This is because women, thanks to the sexual revolution and the feminist movement, have been told they need to be equal to men, which is unnatural, and it is actively destroying their femininity, which is what actually brings like them a sense of joy because it is fulfilling their purpose. A world without purpose is where all this pain comes from. These women no longer are starting families. We see that the average 40-year-old now, right? Only 25%, actually, excuse me, I said that wrong. 25% now are unmarried. That is record high. Not just unmarried, they have never been married. I bet it's closer to 50 that are unmarried at this point. But 25% of 40-year-olds have never been married. And we wonder where this lack of purpose comes from. No, it's because the sexual revolution taught women to be sluts, and they aren't actually going to derive any legitimate pleasure from that, right? Because women get emotionally connected, so they lose that connection and completely get torn apart over it. They feel very connected to these partners they had back in like high school when they're sleeping around because like I said they were overly sexualized and taught to be sluts, which isn't something we saw nearly as much in the 1970s where women would maybe have like 3 partners at maximum before getting married. Like that was probably pretty high at that point in time. And at that point, I mean, 3 partners, it was just like kind of a lot, but you could still make a marriage work. You can't have 10 partners and make a marriage work. It just won't happen. If you have a woman who has had over like 5 even sexual partners in her life, it's very statistically unlikely that she'll actually be able to maintain that marriage. It'll almost certainly end in divorce because she won't feel as emotionally connected to that one man because she's had so many different men satisfy her. And the guys that were doing it earlier were like these Chad types, and then she settled for this guy who is like going to actually just provide for her and not ditch her. But since she didn't have to do that at an earlier age, she got used to like again these chads and the normie couldn't keep up. So he gets divorced, he gets ditched, she gets unhappy, she gets depressed because she has no purpose anymore, ends up with a bunch of cats, and then the husband ends up killing himself. That is what we see in the average. And honestly, that is like the average today. That is expected. The marriage fails because the woman was too slutty essentially. She wasn't content. This is why women initiate almost all divorces. She wasn't content, so she leaves the man, takes half of his stuff, gets depressed, gets a bunch of cats, and copes and pretends to be happy with materialistic goods while sleeping around without actually getting, the satisfaction of raising a competent, and normal children because, broken family, if she even had children at all, while the man ends up committing suicide. That is unfortunately the common today. Like I said, the suicide rates, they are at an all-time high, like by far. We have seen a 37% increase in suicide between 2000 and 2018. That is drastic. A 37% increase in just 20 years. Not even 18 years. I'm sure it's even higher now. Yeah, okay, never mind. At 2021, it was still at about that 37% increase. So, yeah, I mean that's what we're seeing. We're seeing suicide go way up, depression go way up, and yet we're supposed to believe that this liberalism is making people happier. At this point, you are completely brain dead if you think any of the liberal movements over the last 100 years have actually resulted in a legitimate improvement in people's lives. I understand looking at it and on paper being like, oh, this is great. You know what? We needed more of equality. That's what was making people sad. There wasn't enough equality. But that's just not true. People don't want to be equal. Equality cannot exist in a world full of inequality. Inequality will always be there because there are so many differences. Everybody is far too unique to have true equality actually be accomplished. To make two people equal is to strip them of all individuality, and it results in them becoming isolated. There is nothing interesting to talk about anymore. Go talk to most people. Most of them have no interesting ideas, no interesting concepts. They aren't working towards anything because they're kind of letting the current take them in whatever direction it decides to take them. They're allowing fate to decide their destiny. They're resulting with no actual purpose. They are doing things for pure pleasure. And that's what happens because they have no uniqueness. They have no reason to strive to be different because they have been taught equality is the ultimate good. Equality is what we should be striving for, which is really just retarded, to be completely honest with you. It's really depressing what we've seen. And you know what? You know the most important thing in all of this? It's the spiritual health of this country. As we've seen all these different systems get broken down over the last 50 years, coinciding with that, we've seen religion getting broken down. A nation that is spiritually healthy would never allow all the disgusting and disturbing things we have today. If we were still religious, if we were still very healthy, if our spiritual lives were healthy as a nation, we would not allow transgenderism. We would not be mutilating kids. We would not be promoting any of this grooming stuff. None of that would be happening. Yet, since 1970, coinciding with all this drastic increasing in depression, suicide, these drastic increasing in anxiety, we've seen the religion in America go from 90% Christian in 1972 to 63% Christian in about the year 2000. 90 to 63. That is a 27% drop. That is huge. There are 27% less. No, no, no. 27% of Americans are no longer religious compared to 1970. That is, and we wonder why there's so much degeneracy in the nation today. I mean, it's no wonder in all reality. It's quite obvious. It's because we are no longer religious. We have been stripped of all spiritual health. A nation that is not religious is bound to fall. There's no unity anymore. I mean, our borders have been infiltrated. What does that do? That results in new cultures coming in that refuse to be integrated into the current one, that break apart the unity. Diversity is not our strength. Diversity results in diversion. It's not good. Diversity diverts people. That's not what you want. You don't want a diverted culture. You want a community. You don't want one that's split apart. You need people that can relate to each other. That's why we have no community anymore. Nobody can relate to each other anymore. Of course, a nation that was 90% Christian is going to be much more happy because the community can all come together and celebrate something. Everybody you could expect to be going to church. You knew your entire town. There were all these kids running around. That's not anything you see anymore. Parents lock their kids up in their house because it's easier to raise them on technology than take the risk of letting them, oh my gosh, go outside. Which honestly, it almost makes sense because, I mean, all the crap that's going on now. Your kids will the world knows everything about your kids by the time they're like 10 because you post it all over your social media. And it's like you put them in legitimate danger, and now you're trying to compensate by keeping them in their rooms all day because you have like trust issues because you were abused by your parents or you came from a broken family, which is pretty common at this point for millennials. I mean, pretty much what we saw was the boomers had it so good growing up that they just didn't give a crap about the next generation. It was like too easy for them. They grew up in the greatest time in American history and they threw it away. And then the millennials came up from these broken families, from these abusers, from drug addicts, and yeah, everything kind of went to crap because they started raising their own kids and they all turned out with mental illness because they all had like trust issues, daddy issues, and it's even worse now. There's no community anymore. There's nothing uniting the nation, and that's what we need. That's why we need to put a pause on immigration. Like legal immigration too. I used to support immigration. Like I used to be like, "Oh no, it's illegal immigration that's bad." But no. Almost all immigration is hurting this country at this point because we allow far too much of it. We need to only allow families to come into this country. That's my view at this point. If you don't have a family, you should not be entering this nation. You're not going to provide anything. I don't want these 40-year-old men coming into the nation with no family. Do you really think they're going to provide something good? Do you really think that they're going to result in a net positive? No. At best, what do? Join the workforce? Take a spot away from a American? It's not what we want. It's not what we want at all. They come in and they destroy our culture because they're not part of the culture. The only people that should be coming in are honestly Christian families. If you're not a Christian family, you shouldn't be allowed into the nation. That's just my legitimate view at this point because we need to save the union. And that's the only way. We have to bring Christianity back. If we want to import people, like that's fine. If you want to have immigrants come in, whatever, but it needs to be people who are going to result in a net positive. It needs to be Christian families. Christian families could help this nation greatly. They would seriously have a very positive effect. But any other group is going to be a drastic harm. There is like some positive news in all this, I guess, is like we can make a change if we revert back to Christianity. If we can bring back community, we can still save this country. What we have to do is deal with spiritual health above all else. I mean, everybody likes to focus on like the little minor problems like, oh, there's men going into women's bathrooms. Is it bad? Of course. Is it something that I support? No. I would like that to be gone. But the reason it's allowed is because we live in a spiritually unhealthy nation that is going to continue until this gets fixed, like undoubtedly. Why do we allow abortion? Because this nation has no morality anymore because you can't have morals without being religious. Anything other than Christianity is Satanism, and anybody who tells you anything otherwise is just wrong. You could argue that maybe not Muslims, they might not be Satanist, which, I mean, you know what? Fair enough. I'll give them an out because, I mean, there's lots of scholars there's lots of people in the Christian faith that do believe we worship the same God because, our God and the Muslim God is very similar. They just believe in God the Father while we believe in Jesus Christ. Um, Still not good. You should believe in Jesus Christ above all else. Jesus Christ, the Father, the Holy Spirit, you need all three. But still, Muslims might be worshiping the Father, so I'll give them a pass. But every single other group, or just Satanists, they're all like demon worshippers. Oh, the pagans, so what do you think they're worshiping? They're worshiping demons. You really think their gods just came out of nothing? No, they didn't come out of nothing. It's just demons. Atheists are just doing either the worship of science, which is the worship of man, or the worship of just themselves. And the worship of man and the worship of the self is just both Satanism. Atheists are Satanists. I mean, if you're an atheist and you're watching this and you get offended, good. I hope you are because I hope you look into this and realize the truth. If you really want to convert to Christianity, just look at how every single person in power, they are all Satanists. They all do these satanic rituals and actually gets them places. It wouldn't work. They wouldn't all be doing this if the devil wasn't real. If demons and demonology, if all that stuff was just complete BS, none of these people would be practicing these satanic rituals. And Pretty much every person in Hollywood does these. Every politician does these. They've all been caught. They all have these like satanic signs. So, yeah, there you go. I mean, if you need a reason to believe in God, just look at the Satanists and see how it actually like there is power in it. And if Satan is real, God has to be real. So, there you go. That's my best pitch that I've seen so far for that's what converted me to Christianity, just looking at the evils of the devil. That's the most obvious outlook that will lead you to God. So you have that. But once the problem is, I get off track a lot. I mean, I do this unscripted. I think it's more fresh when I do it. I know I say this in like every video, but it's true. So, the way we actually save this country is becoming spiritually healthy again. Until we become spiritually healthy, we're going to keep having new problems. Like, we can solve each little problem, but it's like just putting like a band-aid on a giant gash. Like, the band-aid on the bullet wound isn't going to do crap. It'll stop the bleeding for what? A little bit? But you still have the internal bleeding. You still have all the damage that's going to kill you. Or look at our nation as like this. You know what? I'm going to do the most American thing ever. Okay? World War II propaganda references. Okay? America is a soldier storming the beach of Normandy. He has been shot by telling that they can't go into the men's bathroom. What is that doing? I just think I think that's a slur according to YouTube. So I'm gonna beep that out. By telling transgenders that they can't go into the bathroom, that is like putting a band-aid on the bullet wound, right? A band-aid on the bullet wound. The soldier's still gonna die. The band-aid isn't gonna do crap. What you need to do, to actually save the soldier is to actually fix the wound. You have to fix the wound. You can't just put a band-aid on it. And the way we fix the wound, this bullet hole, is by removing this like what's a good way to put this? My analogy is kind of falling apart here, but it's all right. We have to actually address the wound, and the wound is this lack of spirituality in America. People have lost sight of God, they have lost sight of Christ, and it is killing them. It is killing this nation. It is resulting in disease and decay on a mass scale. So we need to stop putting band-aids on the wound, and we just have to address the problem for what it is. If we don't return the nation to a Christian nationalistic stance, or I mean, the nation will die. There's no other way around it. If you're not a Christian nationalist, you don't care about the nation, and it's going to die. That might offend some of you, but I don't really care. But that's the truth. If you're not following Christ, you are on the wrong side. You aren't on our side of this battle. You are part of the problem if you aren't on God's side. But yeah, that's what we got to do. Bring God back to the nation, and all these other problems will go away by themselves. And that's just the truth. If we address the overall issue, if we bring God back to the people of America, they will reject all the degeneracy again. They will view it as evil, and we will naturally go back to a conservative state. And as long as we have an atheistic state, or the satanic state, it will continue moving further and further into its own demise. Because that's what Satanism and the worship of itself does to all things. It corrupts and destroys. It does not create. While God creates, He made this beautiful world for us and this beautiful country, and we must preserve it by bringing it back to God, and that's the only way to do it. I'm going to wrap up the video on that note, though. So if you enjoyed, like, subscribe, share it. I greatly appreciate it. It probably isn't the best conclusion ever. I got to work on that, but yeah, you get what I'm saying. We got to bring God back, and that's how we save the country. But yeah, the only way we are going to be able to take back this country is together, so join the fight. I do have a Discord server. It got nuked once, but there's a new one, so join that. I believe the link should be in the description. But yeah, I'm going to wrap up the video on that note. So long, peace out, and God bless y'all.